A German shepherd stood quivering at the edge of the livestock yard, ribs showing sharp under his patchy coat, eyes haunted by memories no one else could see. Beside him, a scarred Doberman pressed her body against the cage bars, her belly heavy with unborn pups, while a battered Rottweiler leaned across them both as if his sheer weight could shield them. They had been beaten, chained, treated like tools instead of lives. Few imagined anyone would want them. Fewer still believed rescue was possible. But in the crowd stood one man, a Marine who had buried more brothers than he cared to count. He saw something others missed. He remembered battlefield smoke, the crack of rifles, and the loyal dog who had once dragged him out of hell. What followed would break hearts and remind everyone watching that miracles sometimes walk on four paws. Before we start, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe every living soul deserves another chance, don't forget to subscribe, because this story may just restore your faith in mercy. Harbor Springs woke under a pewter sky, lake wind combing red-tipped maples along Little Traverse Bay, carrying the scent of wet cedar and worn dock planks. The Saturday farm auction gathered beneath a timbered pavilion near the fairgrounds, hay dust floating like golden powder through slats of sunlight. The bleachers creaked with history, county fairs, 4-H ribbons, long ago laughter. Men in flannel shirts and women in wool hats cupped paper mugs of coffee while the auctioneer's cadence rattled like a freight train over tracks. The air was cool enough to sting cheeks, gentle enough to suggest good fortune when the clerk flipped to a sheet marked retired security animals. A subtle shift rippled through the crowd. It wasn't the easy chatter of vegetables and seed corn anymore. The word security hung heavy, unsettling in a small-town morning. Travis Beckett moved closer without realizing it, pulled by instinct born from years of walking into trouble before he knew its name. 35, just under 6 feet, his runner's frame softened a little since leaving the Corps. His hair cropped short, silver threads beginning at the temples when light caught right. His jaw had the hard lines of someone built for stubbornness, his eyes the gray-green of the bay under storm clouds. He wore a faded field jacket over a plain shirt, jeans, and boots still etched with desert dust. A crescent scar cut across his right brow, the mark of shrapnel that had flown the wrong way. In crowds, Travis carried himself with a quiet stillness Marines bring home when the war doesn't leave their bones. Not exactly friendly, but steady, like you could set a coffee mug on his certainty. War had carved him down to essentials, patience, discipline, few words. But one act had reignited something bright inside him. A military dog named Ranger had once dragged him from fire in Afghanistan, singed fur, blistered paws, growling at death itself. Ranger hadn't survived long after, and grief had become both compass and ember for Travis. Since leaving the Corps, he avoided auctions. Auctions were the language of loss. Yet here he was, shivering under the lake wind as metal cages rattled into view. The first rolled forward, a German shepherd whose bones were drawn like a map beneath his skin. 3, maybe 4 years old, worn teeth and stiff joints betraying too many hard miles. His sable coat should have been rich but was dulled and thin, gray dusting his muzzle too young. His head carried the noble wedge of his breed, eyes amber brown like wet autumn leaves. He didn't shrink, not exactly. Instead, he placed himself between cage shadows and the crowd, shoulders angled as if to say, "I'll take the first blow." His ribs jutted, but his attention was sharp, unwavering, and it locked on Travis the way a compass needle finds north. The second cage rattled out. Inside, a Doberman pressed against the bars. Young, maybe 2 years. Her mahogany coat was marred, a torn ear healed into a jagged crescent. Her swelling belly made her heavy with life. Pregnancy lent her a strange gravity, like tides pulled by the moon. Her eyes, dark bronze, resilient, held the weary tenderness of a mother bracing against storms. When a man laughed too loud nearby, she flinched, then steadied herself, refusing to bow. The third cage shifted with a presence that filled the space. A Rottweiler, old-style broad and massive, maybe 5 years, maybe less. His chest was wide, his skull square, his back lined with scars rubbed raw by chains. He moved like a boulder with a heartbeat, choosing to block instead of bite. In that cramped cage, he pressed a shoulder against the Doberman, trying to be her wall. Just beyond them stood Victor Langford. Mid-40s, narrow-shouldered, tall like someone always chosen for the back row of photos, but never strong. His ash-gray sweater tailored to his bones, wool coat polished to a city sheen. Hair combed with precision, watch gleaming, his pale blue eyes cold and measuring. He introduced himself to staff as a representative of a regional security firm, but to the crowd as a concerned citizen who wanted these dogs placed only with qualified handlers. He shook hands before they were offered, spoke names before being told. His associate flashed paperwork that rattled with authority, though the ink faded under scrutiny. From the aisle, Ava Sloan filmed it all. 16, small and quick, hair cropped in a blunt bob that made her hazel eyes impossible to miss, bright, but bruised by quiet hurts. A thrifted parka swallowed her frame, her canvas camera bag patched with stitched symbols, a paw, a lighthouse, the word hope, mended more than once. Ava volunteered for the community channel, part public service, part lifeline to decent company. Her father had left when she was 10, her mother buried in double shifts at the nursing home. Between those absences, Ava had chosen the most stubborn act she knew, showing up. Animals, at least, met her gaze without flinching. As the cages rattled past, the Rottweiler leaned harder toward the Doberman, shielding her. Ava's throat made a noise not meant for words. She kept filming. The auctioneer's voice rolled out like weathered rhythm. Decommissioned security dogs. Some handling required. The first bids came lazy, then cruel. Hard-eyed men near the back joked about bundle deals. Tattoos inked like bravado, they laughed through their teeth. Lot price, not parts, one sneered. Another flicked his cigarette against concrete. Someone muttered the shepherd was skin and bones. Another said the Doberman was ruined by pregnancy. A man in a canvas vest explained how he'd turn a Rottie into quick cash. The air thickened with indifference disguised as practicality, the crowd shifting toward callousness. Travis didn't remember moving forward, only the tilt of ground beneath his boots, blood finding a new course. The shepherd lifted his head, eyes locking with his, bridging an unseen field. In those amber eyes Travis saw scars, yes, but beneath them, something familiar from valleys in Afghanistan, a readiness to move when the signal came. For a heartbeat, the pavilion emptied of language. He noticed a star-shaped burn on the shepherd's flank, the polished patch where the Doberman had licked bars raw, the single stubborn hair at the Rottweiler's mouth that clung against odds. And he remembered Ranger, 55 pounds of loyalty, ears torn ragged, pressing his head into Travis's chest after pulling him from fire. Ranger had given him the one gift soldiers never know how to ask for, permission to live. Now, in the shepherd's gaze, that permission became a command. "Do I hear 500 for the lot?" the auctioneer called, his chant rolling across the pavilion like gravel poured over tin. 5, barked a scarred man from the back. 6, added another, his belt polished smooth by years of carrying a holster. 7. A younger one shouted, eager to impress the older men, his voice too loud, his pride built on cruelty. Victor Langford slipped his hands into his coat pockets and watched the bids play like a man studying fish in a pond. His eyes measured the crowd but revealed nothing. The numbers climbed, wrong reasons stacked on wrong intentions, and the taste in Travis's mouth turned metallic. He thought about savings meant for storms. But storms didn't wait politely at the horizon, they came crashing, and here it was. He thought about value measured not in coin but in ribs and promises. He thought of Ranger. He thought of debt carried in bone, not in banks. 800, the auctioneer pressed. The crowd chuckled, as though he'd made a clever joke. 900, Travis said. Not shouted, spoken. But it landed like a nail hammered into wood. Heads turned. Ava's camera swiveled toward him. Victor's smile thinned, sharpened. The hard-eyed men shuffled their egos, irritated someone had broken their rhythm. 1,000, said the holster man, jaw jutting. 11, Travis answered, his eyes still locked on the German Shepherd. The auctioneer grinned, delighted by the drama, letting numbers dance off his tongue. Gasps rippled through the bleachers like an old county fair game. 2 bidders peeled off. The youngest clung on, feigning bravado that looked more like addiction to being seen. 15, he tried, chin high. 2,000, Travis replied. His voice didn't rise, but the crowd did, murmurs clucking like hens because money was a story they thought they understood. Boot heels ticked against planks, hearts quickening with appetite for spectacle. The auctioneer fanned it, Victor prowled in silence, Ava filmed, the whole pavilion bending toward something no one would name. 32, spat the boy, grin ugly. 40, Travis said flatly. The boy cursed under his breath, dropping his bid like a tool he never knew how to use. What remained wasn't a bidding war. It was reckoning. 5, called a rancher from the side. Travis didn't recognize him, possibly Victor's ally. 6, Travis countered. The increments leapt now, 50s, then hundreds, the auctioneer sensing real money. 78, came a shout, the crowd leaning back toward hunger. Compromise whispered in Travis's ear, but he knew compromise was a starvation of the soul. Something inside him settled heavy, like anchor chains dropping into deep water. He looked once at the Doberman, her belly taut with unborn life, her torn ear bent but unbroken, and once at the Rottweiler, shouldering the bars like a man straining against a collapsing door. 8,000, the auctioneer called, his voice cracking with excitement. 8 for the 3. Do I have 85? The pavilion murmured. Wind sifted through rafters, carrying the cold edge of the bay. 9,000, Travis said. For all 3. The gavel froze midair. Victor's lips parted, eyes flicking as if weighing whether to stir noise, but some silences are too precise to break with salesmanship. Sunlight glanced across the shepherd's eyes, turning them molten amber. The Rottweiler exhaled, lowering like a man setting down a heavy box. The Doberman lifted her head and held it steady. The auctioneer wiped his palm against his jacket as though checking the pulse of his own heart. Faces in the bleachers leaned forward, learning a new kind of math, not about dollars, but about what matters. Going once, the auctioneer said quietly. A man in the back shifted, as if to force life back into a dying bid. But Victor laid 2 fingers across his sleeve, a tiny benediction of control. Not this time. Going twice, the auctioneer said, eyes darting toward the cages as though apologizing to the animals for the words he had been paid to say. Travis breathed in, scent of wet wood, diesel from the bay, hay dust thick in the light, and felt indecision slip off his shoulders like a soaked coat. He wasn't speaking to the crowd now. He spoke to the space between gavel and table, to the dogs, to the boy he had been long ago who believed courage was louder than fear. I'll take them all, he said. No drama. Just truth. The gavel struck wood. The sound didn't echo, it held, like a hand closing on a promise. The chatter stilled, folding into a hush that carried the weight of prayer. Ava lowered her camera against her chest, her knuckles pressed to her mouth. Victor's smile stretched thin, razor wire now. And in that cold, bright slice of morning, the shepherd's ears flicked forward. His gaze anchored on the man who had just bridged the chasm between them. Something in both of them, something ancient, something that survives beyond battlefields and borders, rose to its feet. Travis Beckett guided his battered Ford pickup along the lakeside road, his grip firm, the kind of attention a man gives when carrying breakable treasure. Harbor Springs had fallen into dusk, and now full night settled, the chill air spilling in from Little Traverse Bay. The wind rattled the dry reeds, pushed ripples of silver over black water. His headlights cut a narrow path through the mist drifting across the asphalt. In the truck bed, tarps shifted over 3 cages. Inside, 3 survivors rattled with every jolt. Arrow, the German shepherd, ribs showing sharp through his thin hide. Nix, the Doberman, heavy with late pregnancy. Bear, the scarred Rottweiler, his bulk uneasy in confinement. Travis checked the mirror again and again, as if his focus alone could keep their hearts beating until help. On the edge of town stood Rivers Animal Care, a two-story clapboard building painted cream, a lantern swaying over the porch, the wooden sign above the door carved with a dog's silhouette. It looked more farmhouse than clinic. But inside, fluorescent lights hummed over pale tiles, the scent of antiseptic sharp and steady. The door swung open as Travis carried Arrow in his arms. A tall woman in a half-buttoned lab coat and scuffed sneakers stepped forward, Dr. Maya Rivers. 39, lean and brisk, she carried herself like someone who believed kindness was most effective when backed with discipline. Her black hair was pulled into a low bun, a pencil tucked behind one ear, glasses slipping slightly down her nose. Her cheekbones were sharp, her brown eyes quick, weighing the scene in a single glance. Years ago, Maya had lost her younger brother to an icy road accident. Since then, she had lived inside a balance between grief and determination, refusing to waste a second of anyone's chance at survival. Animals had become her covenant, living beings she could save, when the past had given her no such power. Set her here, Maya ordered as Travis brought in Nix next. She didn't need explanation. She saw the tremor of contractions, the torn ear, the dilation. She moved with a precision that made panic useless. Ellie. From the back came Eleanor Ellie Price, a stocky woman in her late 50s with cropped gray hair, warm eyes rimmed in fatigue, and decades of work stitched into her posture. Ellie rarely spoke more than necessary, but when she did, her words carried blunt affection. Ava slipped inside behind them, clutching her camera bag like a shield. 16, curious to the bone, she kept it zipped shut this time. The sight of Nix collapsing onto the table silenced her instinct to film. She hovered at the wall, awkward, until Bear lumbered close, pressing his scarred head against her thigh. Startled, she froze. Then, slowly, she slid to the bench, and Bear lowered his heavy head into her lap. For the first time since the truck ride, Ava let out a cracked laugh, shaky but real. Arrow paced once near the door until Travis knelt beside him. The shepherd's body trembled, torn between weakness and will, but when Maya gestured toward the threshold, he settled at the doorway, watching like a sentry. Even in exhaustion, he understood his role. The operating prep began instantly. Ellie shaved Nix's belly, clippers buzzing, while Maya measured anesthetics. Travis hovered, restless, until Maya shot him a sharp look that translated without words, help or get out. He helped. Scrubbing hands, fumbling into a sterile gown, standing stiff until Ellie shoved a bottle and nipple into his palms. The pups will need formula, she said. Travis stared at the thing as though it were a grenade. He tried, awkwardly, milk splashing onto gloves, dribbling across the floor. Marine defeated by a baby bottle, Maya muttered without glancing up from the incision. Don't tell my drill sergeant, Travis muttered back, his ears flushing red. Ava even smiled faintly, though her gaze never left Nix's rising and falling chest. The surgery stretched on. Overhead lamps burned hot yellow, casting long shadows. Maya's hands moved with sharp economy, scalpel tracing, clamped steady, her voice low and constant, guiding Ellie through suction and suture. Nix twitched once, monitors shrilling. Travis stiffened. Stay steady, Maya snapped. She's fighting. That's good. Minutes bled into hours. The world collapsed to beeps and breaths. Arrow never shifted from his guard at the door. Bear dozed against Ava's lap, whining softly in dreams, her hand stroking his scarred back without thought. Ava's phone buzzed with messages she ignored. At 2 hours and 40 minutes, Maya lifted the first pup, a slick, tiny thing, squeaking weakly. Ellie rubbed it briskly with a towel before laying it against a warming pad. A second followed, smaller, slower, breath-catching before it steadied. The third never cried. Maya's mouth pressed thin, her eyes shuttered. She stitched with grim focus, her knuckles pale. 2, she said finally. That's what she could give. Silence thickened. Then Nix's monitor faltered, flatline. Travis's chest froze. Quiet. Maya barked. Her hands worked furiously, compressions, injections, whispering Spanish half-prayer, half-order. Ava's camera bag slipped unnoticed to the floor. Arrow surged upright, hackles high, ears forward, guarding the door as if daring death itself to enter. The monitor blipped. Paused. Blipped again. Rhythm returned, fragile but real. Maya exhaled, shoulders dropping. She's back, she said. Ellie touched her wrist gently. Bear lifted his head, letting out one low, relieved woof. The puppies squeaked faintly against warming pads. Maya stripped off gloves with a snap, sweat dampening her brow, voice steady. She'll live. The pups, too. Travis pressed his hand to Arrow's neck, feeling coarse fur trembling beneath. Ava wiped her eyes roughly with her sleeve, embarrassed by her relief. The clinic smelled of disinfectant, iron, spilt milk. But more than that, it smelled of survival 1 inch by inch. Outside, Harbor Springs was hushed under autumn dark. Inside, 1 Marine, 1 veterinarian, 1 girl, and 3 battered dogs drew breath together, as though they had chosen each other without saying a word. The boathouse sat at the quieter end of Harbor Springs, a weathered timber structure with peeling white paint and cedar shingles mossed from years of lake mist. Its wide doors, once built to admit wooden skiffs, groaned when Travis swung them open. Late autumn light bounced off the bay, carrying a crisp tang of salt-tinged air and rusted chains. It wasn't meant for recovery. But Travis had lived in worse shelters overseas. He'd learned how to make do. He pushed the cages inside, the old floorboards creaking under their weight, and let the draft sweep through, cleansing the stale air with something new. Arrow stepped cautiously from his crate, paws whispering against planks, amber eyes sweeping the space as if mapping terrain. Bear lumbered out next, nails clicking, massive head lowered in apology for simply existing so large. Nix moved last, still weak, body trembling from surgery, her newborn pups carried in a lined wooden box Travis had prepared with blankets and wool. He set it gently in a corner he had cleaned, straw layered for warmth. The place smelled of sawdust, dried fish, and now, hope stitched together with patience and antiseptic. Travis worked like a man falling back into a campaign. He set clocks. Drew up feeding charts. Divided the day into strict shifts. Every 2 hours, he warmed bottles on a portable stove and fed the pups carefully, learning how to angle the nipples so milk slid past squeaks instead of choking them. Between feedings, he massaged Arrow's stiff legs, coaxing circulation back into muscles wasted from confinement. Arrow responded quickly, sitting straighter, ears tilting at commands, sit. Stay. Heel. The old discipline buried in his blood flickered alive. For Travis, the rhythm of drills returned like muscle memory echoing in the boathouse shadows. Bear, by contrast, was slower. He seemed more invested in chasing spots of sunlight across the cracked boards than perfecting obedience. When Travis commanded sit, Bear obeyed, then immediately flopped sideways, snoring. Ava, who had begun visiting after school every day, laughed until her shoulders shook. He's like a bus driver who naps at every stop, she teased. Bear cracked one eye and huffed, as though he understood and accepted the role. Nix curled around her pups with a devotion so fierce it was almost visible. Her torn ear lent her a battered nobility. She allowed Travis near sometimes, but not always, judging each approach with an instinct no manual could teach. Her slender body rose and fell with exhaustion, yet her gaze never wavered from her babies. Life in the boathouse found its rhythm. Travis woke before dawn on a narrow cot set near the cages. He logged meals in square, neat script, the handwriting of a soldier. He walked Arrow short distances, cleaned Bear's wounds, checked Nix's stitches as Maya had instructed. At night, lantern glow turned the wooden walls amber, and the soft lap of waves against the dock became lullaby. Ava became part of the rhythm too. She brought her camera again, though now she asked permission before filming. Travis shrugged, uncertain about their private fight becoming public. But Ava insisted. If people see, they'll care. And if they care, they'll help. She created an online channel, Harbor Hounds. Short clips appeared, Arrow walking in precise lines like a Marine. Bear yawning in the middle of stay drills. Nix licking her pups, patient and tender. Ava's edits were instinctive, captions rolling across the screen in white, 2 hours in, Arrow walks like a soldier. Another, Bear, expert napper. The clips spread quickly. Harbor Springs was small, but the internet could make a boathouse window a stage for the whole town. Comments stacked, likes fanned outward, people leaning closer through screens. Still, the truth inside those walls was fragile. Arrow startled at every sudden clang. Bear whimpered in dreams. Nix sometimes shook so badly Travis had to steady her with both hands. Healing was not straight lines but slow circles. Yet every stumble was matched with a victory, Arrow completing a full sequence of commands. Bear fetching a stick without chewing it to splinters. Nix lifting her head when Ava sat nearby, acknowledging gentleness. One evening, the sunset bruised purple and orange across the bay. Bear lumbered across the dock, tail wagging, dragging something large and soaked. Travis turned just in time to see one of his last good combat boots dangling from Bear's jaws, dripping lake water and chew marks. That was my last pair without holes, Travis said flatly. Ava collapsed into laughter, doubling over, tears in her eyes. Bear, thoroughly pleased, pranced into the reeds. 10 minutes later he returned, dropping a clamshell at Travis's boots as though offering fair trade. Trade accepted, Ava giggled. Travis shook his head, unable to stop the small grin tugging at his mouth. For weeks, the boathouse became sanctuary. The sounds of tiny paws on planks, pups squealing for milk, Ava narrating softly into her camera, all of it stitched together into the soundtrack of evenings. The air smelled of cedar and damp wool, but also beginnings. Then came the letter. It arrived in the neat hand of Margaret Pierce, a neighbor from 2 coves away. 70 years old, tall, with silver hair bound into a braid tucked beneath a kerchief. Sharp blue eyes behind bifocals. A retired principal, known for her strict sense of order, she carried herself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Her petition, drafted on cream paper, read, "For the safety of our children and our community, the harbor dogs of dangerous lineage must be removed until proven safe by proper authorities." Signatures followed, mostly older neighbors who trusted Margaret's judgment more than their own. The following Friday, as Travis ladled boiled chicken into Bear's bowl, 2 officials appeared. Raymond Hole, middle-aged, belly softened by desk years, but eyes still scanning like an old policeman. His partner, Lisa Warden, younger, crisp, clipboard tucked against her chest. They weren't cruel. Just official. They explained the rules, clipped the notice to the boathouse door, pending safety review, these animals are under observation. Removal may be ordered. The paper's bright orange square screamed louder than any shout. Ava filmed silently, her camera trembling. Bear sniffed the paper, sneezed. Arrow froze stiff, ears sharp. Nix pressed closer to her pups, her thin body drawn tight as a bow. Travis folded his arms, jaw set like stone. Inside, it felt like an old battlefield, peace never lasted, and fear was the enemy wearing a neighbor's face. The morning fog lay heavy over Harbor Springs, blurring boats and softening clapboard houses into gray shapes. Travis Beckett stood on the boathouse deck when the courier arrived, handing him a thick envelope sealed in red wax from the county courthouse. He didn't need to open it to know who had stirred trouble. Victor Langford. Always draped in his gray wool coat like armor, Victor had filed a petition claiming the auction bill of sale was fraudulent. His lawyers argued the dogs were company assets misappropriated. They labeled the paperwork forgery. His security firm was little more than a hollow shell, but the letter carried legal weight nonetheless. Travis opened it, jaw tightening. He folded the papers once, then again, before laying them flat on the table. Ava hovered in the corner with her camera bag slung over her shoulder, eyes flicking between Travis and the dogs, waiting for an explosion. But Travis was a Marine. Explosions, he learned long ago, belong inside. Dr. Maya Rivers arrived an hour later, her hair pulled into its usual bun, fatigue etched in her face from another long night at the clinic. She skimmed the documents, lips pressing tight before she set her leather case on the table. "If Langford wants to fight over ownership," she said, "then we'll give the court something harder to dismiss." From her bag she pulled syringes, swabs, vials. Arrow first. The shepherd stood steady as Travis braced him. His amber eyes never left Travis's face while Maya drew blood. Nyx trembled during her turn, weakened from birth, but still regal. Bear resisted, bulk shifting until Ava pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "It's okay, big guy." At her voice, he stilled. Maya explained as she labeled vials. Military working dogs, MWDs, come from traceable breeding lines. Every batch shipped to the Department of Defense is recorded in genetic databases. Arrow's structure, scars, responsiveness, they suggest MWD stock. If I'm right, she hesitated. He could carry markers tied to Ranger's line. The name punched air from Travis's lungs. Ranger, the dog who had dragged him from fire in Afghanistan. Could his bloodline still run in Arrow's veins? 3 days later, the results came back. Arrow's DNA carried markers matching a recorded batch from the early 2000s. The lot traced to German-bred working dogs, the very lineage once paired with Travis's squad. Maya slid the printout across the table. "This isn't sentiment. It's science. Blood." Ava's fingers shook as she picked up the papers. That night, she sat at her desk editing footage. Arrow's scarred frame. Arrow responding to Travis's commands. Text rolling across the screen, "Bloodlines of loyalty never die." The video spread like wildfire, first across northern Michigan, then through veteran forums, then animal rescue networks. Comments stacked in thousands, "That's Ranger's legacy. Proof these animals deserve saving." Ava stared wide-eyed as numbers climbed faster than she could refresh. Attention had arrived, and Harbor Springs could no longer turn its head. Days later, folding chairs scraped across the town hall's worn wooden floor as neighbors filled the room. Mayor Ellen Rohr, a small woman with white hair and a voice sharper than her frame, called order. Margaret Pierce stood first, tall and rigid, silver braid coiled tight. She held her petition high. "These dogs are dangerous," she declared. "I don't care what sentimental stories are spun. They were bred for combat, trained for violence. Do you want weapons loose in our neighborhoods?" Murmurs of agreement rippled from a corner of older residents. But others rose. Jonas McKay, a fisherman with skin leathered by nets and sun, spoke, "That Rottweiler, Bear, watched my grandson drop his toy by the dock. Didn't so much as twitch, just wagged." Celia Grant, the music teacher, added, "Arrow sat calm in my classroom while 20 kids squealed." Dangerous? He was steadier than most parents. Thomas O'Leary, who rented boats on the bay, chuckled. "I've seen raccoons meaner." Finally, Travis stood. His height filled the room, but his voice was even. "Discipline cures fear. Love heals wounds. That's all I have to offer, and all they need." The silence that followed wasn't unanimous approval, but respect. Even Margaret sat back down, lips pursed but words swallowed. Respect, however, didn't stop the law. Victor's lawyers pressed harder. Within a week, the court issued a temporary order. The dogs would be removed to a state facility for 72 to 120 hours of veterinary and behavioral evaluation. Maya would be allowed to accompany them, but the animals were to be taken from the boathouse. The order arrived on a frostbitten morning. Orange trucks pulled up outside, men in uniform unloading steel crates. Arrow sensed it first, pacing, hackles bristling, growl rolling from his chest. Nyx pressed against the wall, eyes wild, pups squeaking at her belly. Bear planted himself by Ava's knees, massive head bowing into her lap as though knowing she would not let him go without a fight. Ava's hands shook around her camera, but she couldn't lift it. This wasn't for filming. This was dread painted across every plank of the boathouse. Travis stood between cages and officers, voice low but steady. Maya goes with them. You'll treat them like lives, not evidence. The men nodded, though their eyes flicked away. The orange notice fluttered on the door. The law had spoken. The dogs were leaving. The state-run holding facility sat on the edge of Pasky, a squat concrete block framed in chain-link fences and humming floodlights. The autumn wind cut sharp across the open fields, and once the sun dropped, cold seeped into bone. Inside, the kennels smelled of bleach, damp fur, and something heavier, despair. Barking ricocheted off concrete, sharp, fractured, hollow. This was a place built for confinement, not recovery. Arrow paced the length of his cage, his gaunt frame tight with agitation. Each time a whip cracked in the distance, used by handlers breaking up scuffles, his chest rumbled with low thunder. His scars seemed to stand out starker under fluorescent light. The discipline once in his marrow frayed with every passing hour. Nyx lay curled in a corner, her ribs showing, pups pressed close against her trembling body. Her milk dwindled under stress, her ears twitching at every metallic clang, every shouted order. She licked her pups tirelessly, trying to make up with willpower what her body could no longer give. Bear scraped at his gate until his claws bled, raw fur rubbed where chain met skin. He shoved his nose through the bars, whining, desperate for the sense of people he trusted. Normally slow to anger, his absence of familiar faces left him restless, frantic. That evening, Ava Sloan appeared at the front desk. Jeans tucked into worn boots, jacket too thin for the night chill, her hair tied back in a quick braid. She handed over an old volunteer badge from a Humane Society project, and the guard, half distracted, waved her through. 10 minutes, the receptionist, Connie, a middle-aged woman with rounded glasses and a cardigan stretched thin, warned. Her tone was kind, weary. Ava nodded and walked the row of kennels, boots squeaking against concrete, eyes darting past lunging dogs until she saw them. Arrow, rigid, gaze snapping to her with soldier's precision. Nyx, thin and trembling, rising only because a friend had come. Bear, his whole body sagged with relief, collapsing into whining groans. Ava dropped to her knees at his gate, and that's when she saw it. The chain of Bear's collar had twisted, a jagged edge biting into his neck. Blood clotted the fur where it rubbed raw. His scratching hadn't been restlessness, it had been pain. Oh, Bear, her voice broke. She slid her hand through the bars, steadying his shaking jowls. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Her fingers fumbled at the latch. Protocol said call a handler. But Bear's whimpers shredded protocol. She tugged, twisted, and the gate squealed open. He didn't surge. He pressed his massive head into her lap, bowing down, breath hot with desperation. Ava pulled the collar free. The wire clattered to the floor. She stroked him, whispering apologies through her tears. Arrow barked sharply, a warning. Nyx's pups squealed in chorus. Ava glanced down the corridor, empty, for now. You have to run, she whispered into Bear's ear. Follow the lake. Find the wind. Alarms shattered the silence. Red lights flashed overhead. The automated system triggered by an unlatched gate. Doors slammed open at the far end, boots thundered against concrete. Ava could have run. Could have pretended ignorance. Instead she stayed kneeling, hands raised. It was me, she shouted. Don't blame them. 2 guards came fast. Hank Berryman, barrel-chested, thinning blonde hair, nose crooked from too many breaks. Suspicious eyes, carrying bitterness from an old case where a seized dog had bitten a child. And Carla Ruiz, younger, dark-haired, calm-voiced but tense. "What the hell did you do?" Berryman barked. "She's just a kid," Ruiz muttered, but her eyes darted to Bear pressing close against Ava. Before either could act, Arrow threw his weight against his gate. Metal popped. He slipped free, nails skittering across the floor. Nix followed, ribs showing, pups nudged along by sheer maternal drive. For a heartbeat, chaos ruled. Dogs. Guards. Alarms. Ava's voice sliced through. "Go. Run to the woods. Find the water. Go." Arrow turned, amber eyes meeting hers, no hesitation, only recognition. He surged down the corridor, Nix and Bear close behind. The emergency exit slammed wide, cold air flooding in, pine and lake scent riding the wind. By the time Berryman lunged forward, the dogs were gone, shadows swallowed by autumn dark, carried toward freedom. Ava remained, shoulders squared, tears streaking her face, but voice steady. "It was me. I let them out." She didn't resist when Ruiz took her elbow gently. Berryman fumed, threatening charges, shouting about danger. Ava ignored him. Her last words were to the empty hallway. "Come back when it's safe. I'll wait." And somewhere beyond the fences, Arrow glanced back once, then again, his gaze a silent oath before vanishing into night. Morning rose pale and brittle over Harbor Springs, the lake a sheet of dull silver, the docks creaking in cold wind. Word spread faster than the gulls, the 3 auction dogs had broken loose from the state facility. Posters appeared at the grocery, on lamp posts, tacked to the bait shop door. Dangerous. Aggressive. Report sightings immediately. But the townspeople had already seen more than posters. They had seen Ava's videos, the dogs napping in straw, nursing pups, listening to commands. The narrative of dangerous clashed with memory, and doubt took root. Still, fear carried weight. Margaret Pierce clutched her petition tighter, muttering to her neighbors about liability and lawsuits. "If a child is bitten," she warned, "the blame will rest here." Some nodded. Others glanced away, remembering Arrow's steady gaze or Bear's clumsy gentleness. The sheriff's office launched a search, deputies fanning out with tranquilizer rifles, trucks rumbling down old logging roads. At night, helicopters combed the forests with harsh beams, the sound rattling windows across the harbor. Ava remained confined to her home, charged with reckless endangerment, her phone confiscated. She sat on her bed, knees pulled tight to her chest, guilt gnawing with each sweep of searchlights across her wall. Still, she whispered promises into the dark, "Come back safe. Please." Meanwhile, Travis stayed silent in town meetings, standing at the back, arms crossed. His reputation as a Marine tempered some of the whispers, but not the suspicion. He spent evenings scanning the tree line above the boathouse, ears straining for faint barks against the wind. On the 4th night, the break came not from police or townsfolk, but from a man long silent. Jake Lawson. He had once been Victor Langford's right hand, a handler who knew the inside of every cage, every ledger. Now his face was hollow, hands trembling from more than cold as he knocked on Travis's door. A scar ran down his forearm, half hidden beneath a frayed sleeve. His eyes darted like prey, but when he spoke, his words carried the weight of confession. "They weren't security dogs," he said, voice hoarse. "They were bred fighters. Langford had contracts, illegal rings across state lines. I kept records. I saw the blood. He broke off, shame choking his throat. Travis poured him black coffee, waited. Marines had patience for men clawing their way out of guilt. Jake slid a battered folder across the table. Photos, receipts, transport manifests. Dogs with numbers instead of names. Victor's company never existed, not legally. He funneled money through shell accounts. Arrow, Nix, Bear, they weren't assets. They were survivors. The folder burned in Travis's hands. Proof, finally, that Victor's empire wasn't built on law, but cruelty. Maya joined them within the hour, her jaw hard as she sifted evidence. "This goes beyond county court," she said. "This is felony territory. Federal, even." Word reached Lansing by dawn. A state task force mobilized, black SUVs rolling toward Harbor Springs with grim efficiency. Radios buzzed with clipped orders: seize animals, seize assets, seize evidence. Victor, of course, played innocent. He appeared on local television, standing in front of his stone house in a tailored coat, claiming he was the victim of theft and slander. His pale eyes flickered with polished control, but his hand twitched against the railing, betraying nerves. That evening, the boathouse filled again with townspeople. The meeting spilled past the door, lantern light glowing against autumn dark. Some demanded the dogs be found and euthanized. Others, emboldened by Ava's videos and Jake's testimony, demanded they be spared. Jonas McKay slammed his fist on the bench. "Those animals never hurt anyone here. You all saw them, Arrow watching kids like a soldier, Bear rolling in the grass like a fool, Nix nursing her pups. Don't let a man like Victor tell you different." Margaret Pierce rose, voice sharp as ever. "And if you're wrong? If a bite happens? Who carries that blood on their hands?" Silence cut through the room. It was Travis who answered, voice low. "I do." The words hung like iron. His gaze swept the crowd, steady, unflinching. "I carried brothers through smoke and fire. I carried Ranger. I'll carry these three. If you need a name to blame, take mine." The hush that followed wasn't agreement, not fully. But it was something harder, respect mixed with surrender. Outside, the wind howled through the maples. Somewhere in the dark, paws pressed cold earth, eyes watching, waiting. And in Lansing, a task force officer snapped a folder shut. The raid had a date. Harbor Springs would soon become battleground once more. The raid came just after dawn, the sky still streaked with lavender and gray, gulls crying out as if warning the harbor. Black SUVs rolled into Harbor Springs, tires crunching frost-hardened gravel. Men and women in dark jackets stepped out with rifles slung low, their faces flat with official purpose. The boathouse stood silent against the lake, lanterns snuffed, doors shut. To the task force, it looked like any other lakeside shed. But inside, Travis sat at the table, boots planted wide, documents from Jake Lawson spread before him. He'd been waiting. The knock rattled the wood. "State Task Force. Open up." Travis opened the door without flinching. His eyes carried the calm of someone who had faced greater storms. Behind him, Arrow stood tall, ribs still showing but stance unshaken. Nix lay with her pups in a straw-lined box, gaze fierce though body thin. Bear shifted restlessly, pressing against Ava, who had slipped in through the back an hour earlier despite every warning to stay away. "You can't be here," Travis whispered. "And you can't fight them alone," Ava shot back. Her chin jutted stubbornly. 16, but carrying the weight of someone twice her age. The lead officer, Captain Merrill, held up paperwork. "We're taking custody. Stand aside." Travis laid Jake's folder on the table. "Evidence. Victor's company isn't real. These dogs aren't property. They're survivors of a crime." Merrill skimmed the first page, receipts, photographs, shipping logs. His brow furrowed. Behind him, another officer muttered, "If this holds," but Merrill silenced him with a glance. Before a decision could form, chaos broke from the tree-line. Victor Langford strode down the hill, his polished coat whipping in the wind, shouting, "Those are my assets. Don't listen to this thief." Behind him trailed two hired men, faces hidden under caps, leashes looped with muzzled pit dogs tugging hard. The scene cracked. Arrow's hackles rose, a growl rolling from deep in his chest. Bear surged forward, blocking Nix and the pups with his bulk. Ava clutched his collar, whispering, "Stay, stay," though her own heartbeat thundered. Victor's voice cut sharp. "Seize them now. You have no right to stall." Merrill hesitated. The law had brought him here, but the evidence on the table shifted weight. And the presence of Victor's dogs, lean, scarred, eyes wild, betrayed truths that paperwork could only hint. Then one leash snapped. A pit lunged, teeth flashing. Arrow met it midair, bodies colliding, paws scrabbling against the dock planks. Bear thundered beside him, shoulder-checking the second dog away from Nix's corner. The pups squealed, Nix snapping at shadows with ferocity beyond her weakness. Shouts tore through the morning. Officers moved, rifles raised, but Travis's voice boomed, "Stand down. They're protecting, not attacking." Ava dropped her camera bag, no longer filming, only shouting names. "Arrow. Bear. Here." Her voice carried sharp, cutting through frenzy. The shepherd twisted, disengaging clean, retreating to her side, chest heaving. Bear followed, growling but obeying. The pit dogs, restrained again by Victor's men, yelped, one limping, the other cowering. The contrast was plain: cruelty bred violence, love bred restraint. Everyone present saw it. Merrill's jaw clenched. He turned to Victor. "You'll come with us. Now." Victor sputtered, but the cuffs clicked cold around his wrists. His polished mask shattered, leaving only rage. "This isn't over," he spat, but his words carried no anchor. Silence fell heavy after the SUVs rolled away with Victor inside. The task force lingered, eyes flicking between Travis, Ava, and the dogs. It wasn't protocol that held them back, it was respect. By evening, the town gathered once more, lanterns swaying in the chilly wind. Margaret Pierce sat rigid, her petition folded in her lap. For the first time, her eyes softened as she watched Nix nursing her pups on a blanket Ava had laid down. Mayor Ellen Rohr raised her voice. "We vote. Do these animals stay, or are they sent away?" Hands rose. Slowly at first. Jonas McKay's, Celia Grant's, Thomas O'Leary's. Then more. One after another, a tide swelling. Even Margaret, after a long pause, lifted her hand halfway, small, but enough. The mayor nodded. Then it settled. They stay. Under Harbor Springs' care. Relief rippled like wind over water. Children crept forward, fingers brushing Arrow's fur. Bear sprawled on his side, allowing a toddler to tug his ear without protest. Nick sighed, exhausted, her pups squeaking against her belly. Ava lifted her camera again, but this time not for proof, just for memory. She filmed Travis kneeling beside the dogs, his scar catching lantern light, his hand resting on Arrow's back. His voice low, steady, carrying words only those closest could hear. "Ranger, they're safe. I kept my promise." The lake lapped softly against the dock. The town exhaled as one. And under a bruised purple sky, Harbor Springs discovered that sometimes salvation wears fur, bears scars, and asks only for a second chance.